know the Nintendo Switch 2 is doing really well when major websites have to completely fabricate and conjure up things to say negatively about the system because they can't pull the sales angle, and the competition when it comes to Microsoft and Sony have tripped and fell and stumbled and flopped so much that they have to try to balance the force out there by saying something when it comes to Nintendo at this point. So we're going to talk about what IGN had to say recently and why I think that while it's good to have some skepticism or criticism, and fair criticism is fine, there's some things in here that make sense when it comes to criticism. The problem is that the premise of Nintendo losing their soul because you simply don't like a game or two or a movie, I think that's the problem with this. There's also some statements in here that just doesn't really make sense that I would say is flat out false or unproven, and the whole template or premise for this article is, I would say, wrong. Now listen, I know this is engagement bait. I know that IGN kind of trolls to get this type of stuff. I mean, we saw it before. We look at what happened last year. The Nintendo Switch 2 has to face a problem the original didn't. Handheld gaming PCs. That was a whole article with a bunch of stuff that ended up being incorrect. Handheld gaming PCs are getting absolutely crushed. The prices are skyrocketing. They're way too expensive. Switch 2 is far more affordable, even with the price increase coming. All things that even at the time that that was written was already happening, and you can see the shift with it, but they ignored all of that for the engagement bait, and they've never followed up on that. So essentially, they're just doing this, obviously, engagement bait and stuff like that, but I wanted to talk about it because I found it fascinating when it comes to the things and looking at what Nintendo has done over the past year or so. Once again, criticism is okay. There's some stuff in here that's fine to criticize. The problem is that Nintendo's not losing their soul simply because you don't like a thing or two or something. So we'll talk about that and a bit more. But before we continue, we are giving away a Nintendo Switch 2 at 140,000 subscribers or on September 1st, whichever comes first. Subscribe, like, comment. The winner will be chosen at random, and it's a worldwide giveaway. Thanks, peeps. Okay, so over on Twitter, the premise for the article was this. The Switch 2 is an iterative update console. The Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and Star Fox remakes are safe bets with generic art styles. The Mario movies are by the numbers. Is Nintendo losing its soul? So we have to stop right there. That's their premise. They go into other things, but the premise right here is incredibly flawed. And it's not even just about opinions. It's just outright objectively flawed. So let's first start off with the Switch 2 being an iterative update console. This is something that Nintendo's done before. If Nintendo is losing their soul, that means they used to do something completely different than what this is. And it's something new for them because, man, they used to do all of this, but now they're doing this thing that's iterative. That's different, right? Well, no, not really. You look at the NES to the Super NES. That was an iterative console. Super Nintendo, did they lose their soul when they did that? Of course not. You look at the Game Boy to the Game Boy Advance. That was also an iterative system. Did they lose their soul back then? Of course they didn't. You look at the Nintendo DS to the Nintendo 3DS. Is that an iterative system? Did they lose their soul at that point? No, they never did. You look at the N64 to the GameCube. Is that an iterative system? Of course it is. They just changed the medium from the cartridges to the mini discs, but the system was essentially a really powerful, better to develop for Nintendo 64, with focus of local multiplayer, 4 controller ports, party games, mix of cool, mature games too, Resident Evil and things like that. So no, like they've had many iterative systems over the years, from the 90s to the early 2000s to the mid 2010s and everything. So to sit there and say that it's an iterative update console and that's part of potentially why they're losing their soul, as if they haven't done that multiple times before. No, they never lost their soul before when they made one. They're not losing their soul now. So that's the first major issue with this. And I'll also state that the jump from the Switch 1 to the Switch 2 is staggering when it comes to the power and what it can do and the feature set and everything. So while, yeah, it is taking what the Switch 1 did and super running with it, it's not a bad thing. And once again, they've done that many times before, and they never lost their soul with the Super Nintendo or with the GameCube or with the GBA or with the 3DS, so it's not here. Now, Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and Star Fox remakes are safe bets. Sure, you can say that they're safe bets. People want those games, but sure, you can say that they're safe bets. But the generic art styles is, I would say, wrong, objectively wrong. And the reason why I say that is because when you're talking about losing your soul because of the art style, the original art style for Star Fox was a realistic graphics type of game. That's what they were going for. The FX chip was literally built to do graphics better than what the Super Nintendo can even do. They weren't losing their soul because they wanted to make a really impressive graphic looking game. Star Fox does not have a generic art style. It has great graphics and it has its own anthropomorphic style within what they want to do. It's pretty much in line or in vision and what you thought the game looked like when you were playing it on your N64 or you were playing it on your Super Nintendo. You thought those were realistic looking animals inside the cockpit of a plane and flying through realistic looking environments. It wasn't supposed to be some type of anime or cartoony type of game. That's not what Star Fox was with the Super Nintendo game or the N64 game. So to say that they have a generic, or to say that Star Fox has a generic art style, I would push back against that a lot. It doesn't. It has great graphics and it has a cool, like I said, shading and tones and mapping and all different types of cool graphical styles and techniques to that game. But that doesn't mean it's generic simply because it's a realistic art style. That makes no sense. There can be a cartoony game that looks generic too. There's a million cartoony type of games. So I don't understand that thought process at all. That makes no sense. Now, when it comes to Ocarina of Time, we've seen one little snippet of Ocarina of Time of Link lying down in his bed. When you played Ocarina of Time back in the day, that also wasn't supposed to be like an anime or cartoony type of thing. It was supposed to look realistic. That's what they were aiming for with the graphics that they had available to them. Now, yes, obviously you go back and look at it, there's odd shapes and stuff like that. And I'm pretty sure that the Ocarina of Time remake will have some pretty interesting and different styles and different stuff in there. But I don't think you can quite call it generic yet without actually seeing the game in motion, seeing all the different backgrounds, seeing the characters, seeing everything. All we've seen is one shot. It's way too early to start doing that, especially if you're going to put it in the same type of art style or bracket as Star Fox, a game that's out and we can actually see and analyze. So that also makes no sense. And I think that the people writing this article, and I think that the people talking about it, like how IGN did this, I think that they know that. They know that it's way too early for that. And they know that Star Fox really doesn't have any type of generic style. They just think that realistic means generic, which is completely false when it comes to that. At least when it comes to Nintendo, realistic means generic. That's silly. Now, let's talk about the Mario movies are by the numbers. Now, the funny thing is that I read the article, and in the article, he complains that because of the Rotten Tomatoes score, the scores aren't good, it's mediocre, it's bad, and that Miyamoto liked it and defended his own movie. He felt that was the reason why they're losing their soul. But I have a problem here with this because that would mean, or that would imply, that Nintendo somehow made a bunch of cool movies that were really good and that all the critics liked and that everybody thought was incredible when it comes to story and everything, and that they went away from that. But the last movie that they made when it comes to Mario was the live action Mario movie, which also got terrible reviews on Rotten Tomatoes from critics. Another problem is that he uses the Rotten Tomatoes score to try to justify what he's saying just from critics and ignores the fact that fans love the Mario movie. A lot of fans like it, a lot of kids like the movie, and those movies are stuffed with Nintendo nostalgia. They're stuffed with Nintendo respect when it comes to different types of things happening, different types of characters. So I don't understand how it's losing their soul when they're actively trying to put different things in the movies. Like, for example, Star Fox being in there. That's pretty cool that he's in there. Gives him some more publicity, some more shine. Obviously, they had the game there, so that was part of it. Having Yoshi in there, they had the Yoshi game too. So it makes no sense with that. Now, another problem that I have, and even in the article, they kind of try to damage control and try to get ahead of people saying, well, hey, what about Yoshi? And what about Donkey Kong? And what about Mario Kart? And what about all these games that have different types of art styles and different types of things? But they do a really poor job of explaining it and saying, well, yeah, sure, they have some things, but then they complain about the $80 Mario Kart as if that somehow means that Nintendo's losing the soul because you don't like the price of the game that the large majority of people are getting in the choose your game bundle or in the original bundle for $50 with the Mario Kart bundle, like that makes no sense. That's just a criticism, and that's fine. You can be critical of that aspect. I was critical of that, but that has nothing to do with them losing their soul. Mario Kart World has more soul than a lot of the other Mario Kart games. A lot of the other Mario Kart games try to play it safe. They just update the graphics. Sure, they have some cool stuff here and there, but Mario Kart World actually adds double the racers, so that's a lot of strain on the CPU and what you can do with the system. It also adds a brand new mode when it comes to Knockout Tour that's really cool. It adds a huge open world that has a lot of variety that you can do different tricks and you can get really skilled in the game. So when it comes to new features and abilities and stuff in the game, Mario Kart World adds more than a lot of the previous Mario Kart games. So it makes no sense when he says that Mario Kart $80 and that they're losing their soul because of that. Another problem is that he tries to damage control with, oh, well, they do have a bunch of games that they've done that have these cool art styles like Splatoon Raiders and Fire Emblem and whatever the case is. But then he says for every single one game that does that, there's a misfire like Metroid Prime 4. Once again, Metroid Prime 4 has nothing with them losing their soul or anything like that. They made the game, it was in bad shape, they saved it, they still put it out, and your own site gave it an 8 out of 10 and said it was great. So that makes no sense. You're just giving a criticism of the game. You didn't like it. That doesn't mean they lost their soul because you didn't like it. Just like they didn't lose their soul when people didn't like Metroid Other M. That was rated just about the same as Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. They're right around high 70s score on Metacritic. So did Nintendo lose their soul then too because some people didn't like Metroid Other M? Of course not. They tried something different, didn't work. When it comes to everybody, they'll probably try something different later. They just had Metroid Dread back in 2021, and they'll probably have a brand new Metroid game coming out pretty soon here with Ravenous with that leak. So once again, criticism is fine. If you don't like Metroid, you can criticize it. You don't like Mario Kart, when it comes to the price, you can criticize it. But that has nothing to do with them losing their soul because they tried some different things in a game, which they've tried before many times in the past. So there's a lot of issues with this article, but I do think it's because they can't go off of the sales stuff, right? I think that's part of it. They can't troll the sales. They can't say, you know, it's not doing as good. There's too much good publicity with some of the stuff with Nintendo so far because Microsoft and Sony are once again flopping with live service, firing people left and right, shutting down studios, and Nintendo's making more first-party exclusives than Microsoft and Sony combined in the last years. So I think this was essentially a scheduled type of thing to engagement bait and everything just because they needed some clicks, because it's such a poorly formed argument when it comes to what's happening here, disguised as trying to be objective when it's really just not at the end of the day. Now, I did want to go over some of what some other content creators are saying out there because they are getting absolutely hammered on YouTube, in addition to Twitter, everywhere. So Endakuba wrote this on Twitter with the quote tweet says, to call the Switch 2 an iterative update console is beyond blasphemous. So we're just going to ignore Mario Kart World's art style reminiscent of the old school art, Donkey Kong Bonanza's art style, Kirby Air Riders art style, Splatoon Raiders art style, Pocopia's art style, Rhythm Heaven's art style. None of those games I listed look generic. Plus, we've only seen one scene from Ocarina of Time. So how in the world can you even talk about that art style being generic when we haven't seen much of anything yet? Also, the Mario movies being by the numbers was good enough to have one of them become one of the highest grossing animated films of all time in the top 10 at number 6. Like, what are y'all talking about? Yeah, that's one of the things that a lot of people are talking about there. Nate from Direct Feed Games, who almost never comments on anything when it comes to stuff like this, actually quote tweeted it and commented with this. This opinion piece should have stayed in drafts. 1. $1 billion corporations don't have souls. 2. The argument that games can only have souls with colorful, vibrant visuals or quirky mechanics is nonsense. Finally, it's engagement bait that argues a weak, poorly thought case. Now, if you go down the list on the Twitter page, once again, they are getting slammed in the comments. And you know things are bad when you have 682 likes and 815 comments with 587 reposts, retweets, or recomments or whatever. Like, that's how you know that you're getting absolutely obliterated and ratioed to death on this one. So Stealth also wrote, we've seen literally half a second of Ocarina of Time footage. Is that enough to call the entire game art style generic? He does say some nice things about Nintendo, but I can't get past that. Haha. Yeah, I mean, there are some good things in there, but the problem is that it's kind of like setting up for the damage control when it comes to other things, and the whole premise doesn't make sense in the first place. Danny G says, what? Just in the past year, there's been Donkey Kong Bonanza, Kirby Air Riders, Splatoon, Raiders, Pokemon Pocopia, Rhythm Heaven Groove, Tomodachi Life, etc. All games with soul and different from anything else out there. Yep. Ant Dude also says, we really out here just BSing articles just for the sake of it, huh? Keep it up. Get them clicks. Yeah. Nintendo Fangirl says, buddy, the one thing we still have is soul. So, yeah, that's like another thing there. So most of the comments are people just kind of tearing them a new one with this. And once again, I have no problem with criticism. You want to say, hey, look, Mario Kart World, the $80 price tag was not good. Or if you want to say, I didn't like Miles McKenzie or the green crystals or some of the aspects of Metroid Prime 4. But when you start using that as some reason why they lost their soul because you don't like certain aspects of it, or because you don't like Miyamoto's opinion that he liked the movie, and even by the own Rotten Tomatoes score that they showed on there, the user score was 87. So people liked the movie. Are we only going off what critics say to say if it has a soul or not? With a lot of those people who don't even like video games, they just did it because it's their job. So it doesn't really make sense to me. The whole article doesn't. And I just wanted to talk about it because I thought it'd be interesting. Catch up with another IGNL. So IGN, I need you guys to address the article here. You guys still haven't addressed this article. Switch 2 has to face a problem the original didn't. Handheld gaming PCs. What happened there? You guys need to address the prices on those. You guys need to address the flopped sales on those. You guys need to address the situation that's happening with the Steam Deck, how the sales have pretty much tanked all the way down to nothing, which you guys yourselves wrote about. Like, you guys need to address that. I still need a follow-up on that article. You know, what happened there? What happened? Why are you guys moving on to something else? This needs to be addressed. So I'll keep doing it because I think it's funny, but that's how you know the Switch 2 is doing really well, when they have to conjure up and fabricate stuff out of thin air, because wait a minute, people are liking it a bit too much. You can't let them get too big of a head. You know, got to keep them honest with stuff. So what do you think about all of this that we talked about here? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, peeps, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out my other Switch 2 RPG content and more right here on screen. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace.